Benjamin Locker. We're grateful to him for letting us come to make this interview. He was a student of Karl Barth at the University of Bonn in the years when Barth first began to lecture on the special theme of theological ethics. In some ways, Barth is such a central influence within the formation of the confessing church in Germany, and his theological influence and impact was so strong. We're especially pleased to have Pastor Locker give some information about Karl Barth when he was developing his theological ethics, and how he, that is Pastor Locker, sees the significance of Barth, and any other impressions he may wish to share about the church struggle, what it taught him, and what it might teach others today about Christian faith and life. So thank you very much for letting us come to be present with you here today. And I wonder if you would perhaps begin by just telling us a bit about where you came from and where you studied, what your family was like, and then perhaps we will talk a little bit about when you were at Bonn at the university as a theological student.
Well, I am a Reformed pastor. My confession in the big between in the varieties of confessions in Germany is Reformed Church. That is because my family comes from Switzerland, and even went first to the Netherlands and then to Germany. In the Netherlands it was also the place where I found my wife.
Who has just served us a very nice tea and another day too, and we are grateful to her.
I met Karl Barth in the second chapter of his developments in Germany. I was already 1938 a big famous theologian, and he found quite a following in the German theologians. I was professor in Münster and then in Bonn, where I met him. I want to underline that means, first of all, this man knew what theology is about. It's always theology has always to do with God himself. But after having a few years taken this view of theology, Karl Barth did not change his views, but developed them to the second theme: what about the man who is in connection with God? So when I was a student, I learned from Barth as well dogmatics as I learned ethics. And it was from immense importance, because when the great political events began in 1933, Karl Barth had already had more than 10 years' time to develop his theology, and because he found lots of young students who were willing to follow him, the year 1933 found quite a lot of numbers of young students and theologians in Germany who were prepared to find the right position against Nationalsocialism. It was a time that the Deutsche Christen, the German Christians, wanted to come to power in the churches, and by very different ways they won the struggle. And in that time, when the struggle for the German against German Christians was going on, Christians in Germany found themselves prepared and authorized to find each other in that was later was the confessional church. In this time of the confessional church, Karl Barth found more and more time not only to develop his dogmatic over all the big themes of theology, but found the time to go in special in the political chapters of ethics. He was known to tell in his first written Aufsatz, theologische Existenz heute.
Yeah, his
Paper.
His first
Lecture.
essays. We would say published essays.
Yes, in theologische Existenz heute.
Yeah.
To say we have to do theology, only theology and nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
But when his followers had that learned, they were able to develop a certain attitude to the political themes of this time. I don't know whether this history of the bekennende Kirche in Germany would have become to such an extent and such a power in these 12 years of Dritter Reich when we had not the preparation in our position in the time before this Third Reich. Mm-hmm. And that was the time where I was a student of Karl Barth.
The new theology of the 1920s was something in which Barth was a major voice, but he was taken to belong to others, alongside others. They, in fact, shared a publication called Between the Times Zwischen den Zeiten, and people like Rudolf Bultmann, Friedrich Gogarten, and Emil Brunner were all involved together with him.
Yes.
About the time that you became his student in Bonn, Barth was less and less comfortable with being a part of this circle of other men.
That's right.
Can you say briefly, or can you point us in the direction of what it was that was new for Barth in this time? Not completely new, but as you said, a development takes place now that makes him less contented to be in the circle of Gogarten and Bultmann and Brunner and others, and which led eventually to dissolving of that periodical.
Some of his friends went other ways. You have friends of Barth from the 20s who are in the 30s on the side of the Nazis. Mm-hmm. And that was not a question of 1 year, of 1 hour, but it was a development which was going on. That's why he, for instance, his great friend Gogarten lost for a time. He did not lose Emil Brunner. His differences to Emil Brunner had other reasons, but not a political reason. The ethics of Emil Brunner, which were elder than the ethic of Barth, had already quite a view for modern ethics and modern theology and modern politics. But in the time of the Bekennende Kirche, the beginning 33, even Barth was not the development which we know now. He was in discussion with his friends and his Gegner, opponents. He was even one night asked to be a minister of church of the new Deutsche Christen Church. But he went to sleep with this question, and when he stood up, he knew what was his answer. The famous Otto Weber went this way. Otto Weber is a marvelous man.
Dogmatik, Zweibahnwende, yeah.
And he was a younger disciple of Barth. He went this way through the politics and found out where it brought him. And that was a point which he knew after 45, and he found later possibility to be not only a great pupil of Barth, but a great teacher in German theology on this side of the differences and not on the other side. Karl Barth brought already with him a certain attitude to the socialistic ethics. As a young man, he found interest in that part of thinking. He was what we call a red pastor in his first congregation in Switzerland, and he knew it. But I find it interesting to say, for the first 10 or 12 years of his position as a theologian teacher, he never touched the political consequences which brought him later on in the fields for Social Democracy. I have taken many hours lecture and discussion and living with Karl Barth, but he never found the possibility to make propaganda for his personal position, which was
Social Democrat.
Social Democrat. It was known in Germany, and even very high authorities in the German Protestant churches were not approving of that. They found it in a sort of fault in the theology. And I think we have to learn from him that he did not forsake his socialistic political mind, but kept him until the middle of the 30s, where he developed that. He developed the ethics. When I was a student in the 30s, he read for his students and developed an ethical system. And everyone who was following him was still full up of the big creed, God is God and the man is man, from the first Barth. But I would like to underline that he never gave that up. The Barth who found a possibility to think about the man has never lost the center of thinking man and God in Christ.
The norm for all thinking in theology must be in the transcendence, the Jenseitige of God, somehow tied. for Barth always through. Yet, it is just that Jensein which
makes
makes
men not only free but eager to take place in the political situation. I remember when the Third Reich started in January of 1933, and the power was gone over to Hitler. Some of the students, I was with them, went to the house of Karl Barth to speak about this tremendous and awful development.
You really felt
Yes,
it was a tragedy
felt.
that Hitler had become the
And
chancellor.
we spoke with him, and I remember that he was already informed about the first deeds of cruelty which had taken place in the night before we came in his house, and that was the way how the Nationalsozialist handled the Sozialdemokraten in Bonn.
Yes. This was when Rosa Luxemburg and so forth in Berlin suddenly fell into the canal.
10 years ago.
At the same time.
No, not at
No,
the same time.
oh, I see. That's correct. In fact, it was earlier. That's correct.
1920.
But
And they are now in 1933.
But when they came to power, then the Nazis did the same thing all over Germany, wherever they could. And Barth already was informed.
And we did not know how he got his information, and he didn't say it.
Mhm.
It was not. It was too dangerous to let people always know what you know. Know what you know. Well, and then in the times which are coming from 1933, we have, as we said, a big development in the way of ethics in Karl Barth, which has later taken place in his dogmatic in some of the great books. The other development which took place with Barth, which we could observe and we could learn with him, was a new view on Christians and Jews. Earlier than Barth has Bonhoeffer discovered the tremendous obligation which has the Evangelie of Christ to the Jews and for the Jews. In his way of life, Karl Barth had not much opportunity to discuss Jewish questions, which is, I'm sorry to say, something which belongs to all of us. We have lived our life, younger or older, without knowing about the present Jews. We learned a lot of the Old Testament. We learned a lot of history of the Old Testament, and we were able to hold 1,000 lectures about the old way of Jews. But that comes up with the point of, and then the Jews did not like to be Christians, and then Jerusalem was disturbed, and then it's null. Then it's
empty for centuries.
Empty.
Like a tunnel,
Yes.
we say. We could see light at the other end in the past
And now we find
and
out
today, but
that that was not true. In the first place, the Jews had their own history, long over the disturbing of the temple in Jerusalem. But we had also a history with our Jews, which mainly was anti-Semitism.
yes.
Mainly the German culture is as the whole culture of Europe, not Jewish-minded, but anti-Semitic minded. And I learned later that the English, for instance, had decided this system in the 12th century when they put the Jews out of country, so there was no question about the Jews. So it was with other countries, with much blood, with much taking life and Vermögen.
Disturbance, whatever, trouble.
And when we start the history of our Protestant churches in the Reformation time is full up of anti-Semitism.
Yes.
We have now at the moment had our Luther jubileum this year. And I'm glad to say that many voices, also of Lutheran theologians, have in all their praising of Luther not kept away that they had to find a new position to Luther in the question of Semitism and anti-Semitism.
Luther himself has some embarrassing contributions
and
to
the old
this.
Lutherans, which are crying for his name and speaking in his name, have him only in his picture as an anti-Semite.
Yes.
Everyone who knows at the moment knows about that Luther has written, the younger Luther, a famous book which could have done very much good if it was wrong. But on the conditions of Luther it was not taken. And he was just friendly saying, let the Jews be Christians and we have no reason for hate.
Yes.
Well, about this question, as you know, Bonhoeffer knew more than Barth and earlier than Barth. Barth has learned of it. He learned from his pupil and has it said openly later and after the war that Bonhoeffer was right earlier than he found out. I remember a very fine essay which Karl Barth had made about the Jewish question. We read it all and we found it very fine. And then a friend of us, a Jew, read it too and said it's an old picture again. We Jews are only the demonstrators of God for you Christians. We are only to use as far as we have our own God, which is the God of the Christians, but for the rest we are forgotten. And that he could make, and this Vorwurf, this scream,
this point, I think,
this
would
point
be,
he could even make to Karl Barth, but Karl Barth revised it. After he had lots of time, after 35, and in one of one place of his books, he makes new ascent, a new impetus to take the Jewish question now as it really was a Christian question.
The Jew reading what you found to be progressive and favorable presentation of Barth's view about the Jews, nevertheless was offended and said, this is the same old thing, maybe a little more tidy or neater, but it still offends.
The Jews who were friends of Karl Barth had to say in the ground of the problem, you have the same problem of the anti-Semitism, which was wrong and write together.
Mhm.
Karl Barth has never been an anti-Semite,
Yes.
but he did not find true opinions about the folk of Christ.
Mhm. The to not be opposed to the Jews is not yet to forsake anti-Semitism,
Yes.
unless one has a positive assessment of Judaism. There is still something, and it's a kind of a lessened but nevertheless offensive anti-Semitism, even in a kind of neutrality or
And
whatever.
Karl Barth is known to be a Christology
Yes.
theologian.
Mhm.
He has taken position in the history of Christian theology, which underlines the central position of Christ himself. But he had to learn that he could take this position by keeping the Jews in his mind and in his love,
Mhm.
and not trying to keep the Jews away from Christ. We had lots of students of my age. We went the same way as I describe now with Karl Barth. Years before that time, Jews was for me no problem.
Yes.
I had Jewish aunt,
Mhm.
and there was no problem. But the question of persecuting Jews has made all Europe discover the many ways of Judenhass,
Of making the hatred of the Jews
Of
real.
Judas.
Mhm.
Small points. One of my uncles I met after 33, 35, he was from the Netherlands, came and said to me, earlier this century, when I met a Jew, I didn't know, and I didn't bother.
Mhm.
But since you German are bothering about this question, I myself start to bother about it. It's not a woman what is going there, but a Jewish woman.
Mhm. Mhm.
And
Mhm.
he said that are consequences of our position, the position of anti-Semitism in the Dritten Reich has spread over anti-Semitism even in Germany.
Mhm.
I would like to underline that, for instance, in Germany, before Hitler, not much anti-Semitism was there war. They were there, you know it, and I must not develop that once. But the great message said, well, that's good fellow or wrong fellow, but he was not a Jew. And now we develop, there are Jews and they must get away.
Yes. There is a way in which Prussia was always the center, after Hardenberg and so forth, in the 19th century, with some ups and downs, was a center of liberal civil rights.
Yes.
And therefore the Jews poured into Prussia
Yes.
as a haven
Yes.
for
It's not.
religious freedom.
Yes.
Which was only achieved much later in Britain, for example, and so forth.
But this Prussia
but-
was of this way, of the young Mendelssohn, it is known. He came as a little boy to Berlin to study there. He was 12 years, I think, starting his university with 12 years. It's a funny thing.
Felix Mendelssohn,
Felix
yeah.
Mendelssohn. And he went to a port of Berlin and he was pushed back. No, for Jews you have another port.
Yeah.
And he had to go through another port, and so he came to Prussia's capital.
Yeah.
And what has this man later 20, 30 years done to to spread a real knowledge of Judaism and a real knowledge not only of old Jewish folk country, Israel in the Old Testament, but about the God's folk under the Jews in my presence. And that was by Karl Barth to find in his second time of life. He was not ashamed to say that has Bonhoeffer found earlier than I, and he went on to make his own attribution to the theology and politics in Germany, but I have no about the elder Barth. I have no point of
information or direct information. I take it that you are saying very strongly that one of the main lessons that ought to be noted from the church struggle, and one that Barth himself had to learn from the going on through several years of the struggle, was how to reassess in a positive way in Christian theology the particular contribution as an ongoing contribution.
Yes.
Not one that was up until the time of Christ, and then all past, but an ongoing contribution of Israel, and that this independent validity of the Jews is one lesson that you feel strongly had to be learned in the church struggle. Would that be correct, or am I?
That's correct. Just a moment. It is it's fine to find out the development of my own church in this question from 35 to 70 or 79. I have friends in Rhineland, and I was a member of that committee who made a new description of position of church and Jewish people. And we had the great pleasure to get the whole synod of the Rhenish Church for once one in this point of a new view on the Old and New Testament.
Yes.
We can learn something more about Christ when we learn some more about the Jews.
Yes.
That is even something which Jew himself said, a German Jew who came from the Netherlands. I asked my wife, and Jew who was in the last century, who became a Christian in the Netherlands. It's a famous man in the history of theology in the Reveil. Well, he said he was a Jew, and he was converted to be a Christian. And then he said, when I became a Christian, I found out what I was as a Jew.
Yeah. To have the freedom
Yes.
to discover those things works both ways.
Of course.
And for the Christian to be forced to understand what the Jew believes and feels about God is also enriching. It's, I think, the case that in the Rhineland, no theological discussion which will in any way produce an official action of the Synod can take place unless there are people who are Jewish present as part of the study commissions and so forth.
Yes.
That's another aspect
Yes,
of your
yes,
action
yes.
of
We-
this committee
we
and
know
of
that.
the Synod.
Of course, there are lots of Jews who are not able to discuss with me questions of belief.
Mhm.
But that are the Orthodox Jewish, and
Yeah.
there are no good friends with the liberal Jews.
Yes.
But the liberal Jews have found the possibility to look after us, to serve us, and to serve us with her look of Christ.
Mhm.
Now we have the development, the terrible development, which is called in the name of Auschwitz.
Mhm.
The Kirchentag and other conferences are able to discuss our Christian belief after Auschwitz and our Jewish belief after Auschwitz.
Mhm.
Um,
An
So-
American theologian, Richard Rubinstein,
yes,
is also very much in this area.
in this
very,
area,
very
yes. Thank you.
active. Yes. We can you remember? You mentioned right at the 1st of February, 1933, you as a student went to Bart, disturbed about Hitler's
The
becoming
development,
chancellor.
yes.
And Bart immediately indicated that he was aware of some harassment and other activities
In
against
Köln,
the
yes.
social Democrats
Yes.
in Bonn. In April of '33, very widespread direct actions against the Jews. On April 1, the boycott
Yes.
of Jewish businesses enforced by the toughs in the streets in their brown shirt uniforms. And then in early April, the various first decrees with the Aryan paragraphs, the law for the restoration of the civil service, April 7, and so forth, started to be issued. Under the Enabling Act, Hitler began to use the power now to essentially Nazify, to make the National Socialist Party view of many things now the national policy as well of the German state. Do you remember in that spring of 1933 any additional, when the boycott occurred on April 1, do you remember discussing it with Bart or not, or when the first decrees became known with the Aryan paragraphs, was there any response on the part of the students or of Bart himself with them, or of him first and you second, or do you remember anything
Many
about
details,
that time?
Many details have not rested in my
Mm.
memory. I know that Bart himself found it not necessary to take written part. And one of my friends was Hans Fischer, a
Mhm.
good disciple of Karl Barth,
Yes.
a friend of mine. This Hans Fischer has, with other friends, pressed on Karl Barth so that he was ready to write his essay Existenz heute,
Mhm.
number 1.
Yes.
I remember that Hans Fischer told me Karl Barth had not so much Lust not much appetite to do that work.
Mm.
You remember the last sentences in that they say, do your work as the singers of a cloister.
Yeah.
That was really his part. What I cannot write about this funny
Yeah.
this.
The little things that go on day to
Yes.
day will distract me from
But-
the main fundamental work of
But
theology.
the same
Yes.
Barth was interested in men, not so much in Jewish men, but in men, and he could not bear that Nationalsozialismus went in war against men.
Mhm.
Our Reformed Alliance in Germany, which is a community of Reformed theologians, as I am,
Mhm.
has had a convent in January 33, and Barth was there. In that resolution about the church today, the conference, which was a sort of synod, took opportunity to let also at least one sentence about the Jews go to the total.
Mhm.
And it states there. Barth has not had the opportunity to do the same in the
Barmen
Barmen.
Declaration.
in the Barmen declaration. He had to do with so many Lutherans.
Yes.
And for the Lutherans it was no question.
Yes.
Not at all.
Mm.
Not at all. About Jews you do not speak.
Yeah,
You pray for them and
that
you
they be
convert
converted
them.
to Christianity.
Yes.
And they have no independent status in the eyes of God. Israel
Yes.
is now
On the wrong
all
side. Yeah.
all completely past,
Yes.
and the church replaces,
Yes.
displaces
Yes. Yes, please.
Israel in the history of salvation. This leads me back to the broader question that we were discussing earlier the other day when I was here. There is a view of Christian faith which says, which perhaps people might have read in Theologische Existenz heute, stick to your own little separate concern. Do not involve yourself with politics and social activity. The affair of faith is a matter innerhalb, with the heart, with the feelings, but it has nothing to do with life outside, except perhaps as the heart affects a man, and he then, in a secondary way, out of his Christian concern for his fellow man, but only in a second move, in a second step, not out of his faith, but from his faith to a second move to become a social democrat or to act in the world.
You are quite right in describing that point. Nearly all our Christian leaders went through this point. They stayed in this point, some stayed there forever, but some of them went through. For instance, Karl Barth and others found it in his duty to take part of the Christian Jews. But it was not long that he discovered, what do I, if I take part for the Christian Jews? Is not there a brother of this Christian Jew which has the same Anspruch on me?
Clean.
And that was an development which we made in all our country. Niemöller has founded the Bekenntniskirche with a small group of Bekenntnistheologen,
Yeah.
and they were able to raise money for Christian pastors who were drawn out in place.
Yes.
But also I don't think he needed more than half a year. He knew that cannot be the end of the truth. There must be an other position, and then we cannot speak about Christian Jews, but as your Jews.
So the status of the Jew as Jew, rather than the special status of someone who, according to the Arian paragraphs, had one or more grandparents who were Jewish but converted to Christianity, who then was a member of the church, a participating Christian, but he was of Jewish background. This was the beginning of concern on the part of Niemöller or Barth or others, but suddenly it broadens and must include the Jew as the Jew.
Even our big theologian, Bultmann, who knew, may I allow to say it, who knew nothing about the Old Testament. You find never in Bultmann the theme of Jews, but in his practice as a member of confessional church in Berlin, or where it was, he was able to do things for first baptized Jews and then for Jews generally.
As Jews.
Yes.
And in that he was better than his philosophical mentor, Martin Heidegger.
Yes.
Because Heidegger was...
Heidegger found it so fine in a big congregation of professors and students to have the Festvortrag, the lecture of the principal lectures, and he has said tremendous bad things.
Yes. Hitler was the man of the hour and the model for all men.
Yes.
And he will restore Germany and Germanity, good Germany.
The instruments of Heidegger did not tell him that this little sentence, he is a man of this hour, has, if it is true, not the authority, first Heidegger, to run your philosophy in another way, as Hitler said, to run our theology in another way.
Yes, yes. And Bultmann was so appreciative of so much that Heidegger had taught him, provided the words with which to interpret the New Testament. Yet Bultmann, at least, as you say, in a troublesome way, did find a way to see with clarity the question of the Jews. And in that way he parted with Heidegger, who never saw the light, I think. Never, and right to the end. Right to the end.
His last work was to write 2 thick books about Nietzsche.
Yeah.
And he found it fine.
Yeah. And lived in Switzerland, as I think, up in the mountains in a hut all the time. Very
living in Switzerland was not a reason to be so German-minded as Heidegger did, because Barth lived in Switzerland and Jung lived in Switzerland, and the great poets lived in Switzerland.
And they knew more what was happening.
Many Germans who flew at Switzerland. It's my country too, my grandfather. Of course. I'm a Swiss myself, still. I have 2 passports. I'm German and Swiss. But many who flew to Switzerland have been sent back to the German destroying powers.
I am interested especially in, before we close, asking some further point about why theology, in Barth's view and in your view, must always include theological ethics, why faith itself must always have not only an inner dimension, but also an outer form of action.
Yes, that is what we learned in the ethics of Karl Barth. He found it out before 33, and he wrote it later in his Kirchliche Dogmatik. He came himself from a theology who made the division, there is theology and there is politics. Or in Barth's beginning already is a healthy mixing up of theology and politics, of theology and sociology. A mixing up which he found out later on even to describe in his Kirchliche Dogmatik. The sentence, I believe in Christ, is not a sentence number one, and then I have to write a new sentence which, let me say, love your neighbor. But the sentence number one, I love God in Christ, has us inner Inhalt.
In a contained way. It contains.
Yes, it contains
the sentence,
sentence I will love the man, because when I say I love Christ, I love a man. That's God who says I love him. I love a God, sons of God. But I love a man, Christ, and I have no difficulties to put my belief on two ways of living. That's the great findings out of Karl Barth. I think that will stay in history of theology. Karl Barth may be forgotten in a certain way sometimes. We all will be forgotten sometimes, but I think his contribution to theology is this new way. How is ethics founded in dogmatics? Founded in dogmatics and not besides dogmatics.
Even he refused to write Theologie und Ethik as verschiedene Bände, yeah?
That is the reason. Therefore, his ethics has taken place in 3 books of Kirchliche Dogmatik.
Right.
I have to read some to find out some ways here and some thoughts there and some chapters there, and I get the whole Barth only if I get Barth the Dogmaticus in his ethics.
Yes. I think many people in the German churches had not learned that lesson very well. And therefore I find that the church, when Hitler came to power, produced both some of Hitler's most his greatest admirers and supporters, the Deutsche Christenbewegung, saw Hitler as God's gift to Germany to lead it out of its own Egyptian bondage and so forth.
But that is not did not come out of their theology, but that came out of her anthropology, of her her human being. Karl Barth heard some day about a disciple of him, and he was a fine Barthian theologue, but at the same time a good Nationalsozialist.
Yes.
And I remember he said, "Let that fellow come to me. I want to find out how it is
how he did it.
how he has on his bed one picture of Karl Barth and one picture of Hitler."
Interesting. And as you say, Bart himself went to a meeting with the Deutsche Christen, and
Yes.
he actually went. That's an interesting
Of course
point.
he went, because it was not in the early times so divided.
Yes.
So to see what we see now, we have no right to put in the
Yes.
early times.
Yes.
Many good people from the Bekenntniskirche have first been good Nationalsozialisten too.
Yes.
Or not many who could not find it possible to be both on the same time. In all my friends, I think there was only one man who decided even to reject the army. He's shot. Of course he was shot. But on all my friends, only one. And that is good to remember, so that we not are going to boast about our deeds for in the church time. It wasn't a question of misgivings and wrong and and faults, of course, also of faults. And
It's always clearer
yes,
after it's over
Yes.
than while it's going
Yes.
on. Yes. There is a point of view, however, that somehow I'm still struck by the fact that faithful people, well-meaning people, were both on the Deutsche Christen side and the Bekenntniskirche. And in both cases, it was their faith that was like the motor
Yes.
driving
Yes.
their interest in the
But
world.
the interesting is that, as we see it now, those people which you now describe, there was no problem about militarism. That was no problem. That was,
Yes.
it was excluded from my different opinion about Hitler and so. But military, there you go.
That was just part of being a
Yes.
nation in the
Yes.
world. A
Yes.
nation needs the military, and it's a hopeless idealism to think of a world without military.
And I know that the question for the church at the moment is to keep, not necessarily Barth's theology, but to keep the new ways he found out, to have things done out of the center, which is Jesus Christ, but not to leave the center to go to the man.
Yeah. Yes. Is there anything you would add? I take it we have said that you learned as a student, as Bart was himself learning. I think that was maybe one of the thrilling
I
things.
will tell you just one thing from Karl Barth again. Karl Barth has in such a way learned about the Jewish question when we spoke about ecumene with him. He went to Amsterdam. He had the first Vortrag in Amsterdam when the ecumene was founded, and he has, of course, critical begleitet the way of the ecumene, that is wrong.
Shared in.
Never left it, but he was critical. But I remember that he said, well, you are glad now that the East Christians, the Orthodox Christians, have come to join the Council of Churches. And I'm sure that is a good deed. And perhaps you will even find out a way of the Roman Catholics to come nearer, not to come in, but come nearer to the Council of Churches. But that is not the ecumenical question. the ecumenical question is, what about the Jews? What does it go about? And there you will be how you define your attitude to the Jews. That will be an attribution to your confession to Christ.
If you still find a way to patronize the Jews, to look at them as needing your help rather than God's help, as you need God's help yourself,
Yes.
you will still be false.
Yes.
I again feel we come near the time when we should conclude. We have been here for some time, but I offer again, before we conclude the interview, the opportunity for you to make any additional statement that you would in summary.
I'm afraid I'm now not in the state to make statements.
Good. I think you have told us much.
Yes.
And we are grateful.
You will find some statements in the...
Yes, I'm sure. And thank you very much for letting us come today.